I've looked at your resume. I've looked at your IMDb, and I have to ask the question: is how do you go from composing music for The Crown to doing a film about ice truckers? Tell me how does that happen, Max? I've no idea.
I think the best part about working for people like Hans and Lauren is that you just get involved in everything that they touch. I mean, for me in particular, Lauren, and it's just, you just gain all these skills about how to approach any different scene, whether it's tension or drama. And, even some of those long crown scenes or those montages where it's covering all these different people and all these different conflicts, those can be brought over easily to a film like The Ice Road, where you're covering the miners, you're covering our baddie, and you're covering the heroes. And you need to be able to write a piece of music that works for all three, but that does these nods to each character or group of characters along the way. So in some ways, it's just like building your skill set and enhancing your toolkit.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you worked with Jonathan on The Ice Road, who also wrote the film. For you, what are the advantages of having a writer-director of his caliber on the project? Because obviously he's done a lot of other stuff.
It was fantastic when he stepped on, when I first met him, and he had already been involved, and obviously he wrote it and shot it, like you said. And he just knows the film backwards and forwards. He knows the character's motivation, which is a huge deal. So rather than there being a question in the film about, oh, why is this character doing this here? How should they be feeling? He knows it because he wrote it. And he's very learned in the mechanics of storytelling. So he was just an awesome person to work with. So I think if I ever had a doubt about something, he was very sure about it. He said, no, this is what we need to do. Or he'd say, no, what you've done is correct. So it was a great experience. He was an awesome person to work with.
So obviously in the film relies quite heavily on momentum and obviously maintaining like narrative momentum specifically. What sort of challenges does that throw up to you as a composer?
What's interesting about when we were working on it, there was obviously a momentum throughout, but it wasn't something that we ever really spoke about, other than the fact that we knew there needed to be a layer of tension and urgency because so much was at stake for all the different characters. So I think more as a compositional hurdle was making sure that all these different ticking clocks and senses of momentum were always evolving and or different, because I didn't want to repeat things too much, but at the same time, you don't want every single thing you write to be completely different. So the key was to weave them in organically so that hopefully it always felt like it just felt natural.
Yeah. So obviously speaking about the key moments and so forth, were there any specific ones which jumped out during the course of the film, which proved to be maybe a jumping off point for you from an inspirational sort of creative point of view?
Well, the first thing we did was we wanted to nail the main theme of the movie, the hero's theme, and that's track 7 on the album. It's called The Ice Road, so the same name as the movie. And that track starts with a riff, and then it leads into the more melodic theme. And you hear that at the very beginning of the movie. So the opening scene with those big ice shots, you hear it as they drive away, and you hear it at other hero moments throughout the movie. And we actually had another one before that, and we were working with it for a little bit. And then one day it was decided between all of us that it wasn't the right approach. Then I wrote this new one, and then that was the key and allowed us to move forward at a pretty fast rate actually, and score the rest of the movie. So nailing that one first, and that exciting riff, that thing that you hear throughout, and then leading into da da da. So then that would be the main theme, and then so that was the ticket. That's what did it.
So you happened to mention earlier on that there are lots of different threads. From my point of view, there are essentially 3 different stories all happening simultaneously in the film. How did you make the distinction? You sort of mentioned it in brief, but how did you make the distinction, maybe broadening your answer in terms of making sure those stories felt very distinct, but still felt obviously cohesive as a whole?
I think it's just having practice writing themes, and that when you have a baddie, like, all right, let's make it a little bit darker. Let's make sure it's a little bit more dissonant, and there needs to be a drive to it. So when I sat down to write that, I also wanted to make sure that it has a different shape and different contour than the other melody, because you very well may write a great baddie melody, but it could somehow be too similar to the other one. So it just takes practice, being careful that all these themes have distinct feelings. And then the Brotherhood theme, that's kind of the more sensitive piano and strings, slow theme. That one I think was that one was easier to make sure that it was different, because it doesn't sing as a tune the same way the other two do. So it's just doing a quick analysis before you go ahead and kind of send it to everybody to make sure, okay, let's be really clear and make sure that our hero theme is.
You've dropped out, Max.
Hello?
There you go.
Am I back?
You're back, yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm putting it back. Sorry about that one.
That's all right. It's going to happen. It's fine.
And the nature of the business.
It is at the moment, yes. Anyway, you were saying.
I was saying it's important to make sure that before you go ahead and send all of your themes to the whole team, that the hero theme is very distinct and different from the baddie theme, because sometimes it's easy to write two great tunes, and then when you listen to them, you think, wait a minute, how did all of a sudden those start to merge? And that can happen because you're working on a film and in the world. So it's just being very clear and being confident and being careful that what you're doing it's the best move and the right move.
Perfect. I was going to say, how collaborative was Jonathan with regards to the actual composition? Because I've spoken to a few composers, and dependent upon who the director writer happens to be, it very much depends on how much they are, shall we say, how many conversations happen and how the process itself works. So in the case between yourself and Jonathan, how did that dynamic happen?
Our phone conversations, because it was kind of in the heart of quarantine.
Yeah, sure.
Started last year in summer, fall. And he's just a fascinating guy. And not going out and seeing tons of people, it was such a breath of fresh air to speak with him, because he's so knowledgeable about so many different topics. And he's a musician as well. Yeah. But it turned out that he wasn't going to kind of get too in the weeds with me about the technical and theoretical approach, which is oftentimes a worry that you have.
Yeah, sure.
So he was very appreciative of all the different work, but at the same time, he knew when and how to say if a piece wasn't the right piece for that scene.
Yeah.
So he would spend a lot of time telling me about how all the things the music needed to do. It needed to hit things, needed to have themes. It just had to be a great action film score. So we talked a lot on the phone about all these different parts. He said, oh, this is the moment where it should switch. In this moment, we should be fearful for the brothers. And what about here? We need to try something that isn't guitar. So very involved and also very respectful of all the work that goes into everything.
Perfect. This is more of a sort of a subjective question. How much room do you think there is for subtlety in an action film when it comes to music? It just occurred to me because I'm watching it and I'm going, I get it's all broad strokes. It needs to do a certain thing. So I wondered, because you mentioned the brothers theme, which comes, I think it's not happened. It doesn't get used extensively, but there's a scene in the cab where they're in the cab and it's early on in the film. Exactly. And it's just underneath, it's just in the background. So if you could maybe give me your take on that.
I think you make a great point, because when you start to work on a movie like this, Jonathan and the producer Al Corley, we are making a Liam Neeson action movie. There doesn't need to be subtlety.
No.
In other words, you get to play into it and have fun.
Yeah.
And play these hero moments, play the baddie moments. But what you just said is exactly right, is once you get into the weeds and you get into these very difficult scenes in, let's just say, reel 1, reel 2, where you're not fully in the thick of the action score just yet. And you're just getting to know these people and there's not that much at stake just yet. And you do need pieces that are subtle. And if you don't have them, then it feels really corny and really out of place.
Yeah, sure.
And you touch on, for example, that scene in the car in the beginning, that was not an easy one to nail at all. That took way more effort than even some of the kind of in the middle of the movie action pieces. And similarly in reel 6, when things are winding down, you need pieces that gently bring you to where you need to be emotionally before, say, at the end when things really pop off and the theme comes in at the end, right before the movie finishes. So, and I think that's kind of the key of filmmaking, is that it's easy to look at something and say, oh, it's just big and bombastic, it's so much fun, it's also loud and thematic. But if you really love film, like clearly you do, you look and you think, wait a minute, this is a really subtle piece here, and you can almost barely hear it, but if you were not to have it, it would be really wrong.
Well, my feeling on it is sort of like, you're absolutely right. It's sort of, you can't, if you've just got broad like thematic, musical, bombastic stuff all the way through, it sort of takes away, you're trying to give it some sense of reality. So it almost pushes it into an unreality if you don't give it something to ground itself to. It's just
That's right.
Just my thought. So I have to say that obviously I mentioned you've got a really eclectic resume. You've done television, you've done film. I actually, funnily enough, I emailed the PR today about the Tomorrow War, purely because it popped up on your. I'm like, I remember that, so I've popped one off to PR about that. I have to ask, with all of these different genres and all of these different, you've got documentaries and TV and film and all sorts of things, what is it that still drives you creatively? How do you make your choices in terms of projects?
It's switching genres often and throughout the year is the key to coming up with fresh ideas, I think, because if you only do action movies, by the end of a year, you're going to be thinking, God, I have to write more action music. I have to come up with more ideas. But going from an action movie to a documentary and then a drama, it really keeps the imagination fresh and agile. And so that when you sit down to write on, let's say, another action movie, hopefully a year or two later, then you might have an approach that could have been enhanced by working on a documentary or a drama. So it's all useful. And I think that's the key. And practice, of course. It's just practice. Like, all right, another project here. How do I approach this one?
Practice with everything. So looking at, again, having worked in both television and film, as mediums, which one do you think provides you the most freedom when it comes to doing what you do? And whichever one it happens to be, why would that be?
I think TV and if the difference is between TV and film, I would say in a film, you might get a really long scene that requires a huge thread, like 10-12 minutes. And even if it is a few cues separated, but there needs to be a really big arc. And I think doing that, even in the Ice Road, for example, in the climax of the movie, it all has to keep ramping and going. And that's a huge task, and it's exciting to do because it kind of, dare I say, harkens to writing the same thought process it takes to write a symphony, where there needs to be this thread, but it all needs to keep building, and there needs to be a climax, and that's exciting. At the same rate, working on something like His Dark Materials, you really get to delve deeply into these characters, and you get to know them way deeper than you do in a movie, just because of the nature of the runtime.
Yeah.
So you get to take that theme and explore it in more ways easily than you do in a film, and that's exciting too.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I have one last question, and it's completely off topic. Can you describe for me your perfect Sunday afternoon?
I think, okay, going to the beach with some friends, eating some seafood, and then watching a movie, I think.
There you go. Doesn't need to be complicated, doesn't need to be difficult.
Exactly.
And it's whatever you want to do, and you're not talking about work.
Exactly.
What could be better? Max, thank you so much for your time.